Should we get started?
Yes, you have quite a few participants, and we already have some hellos.
Oh, nice, very nice. Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started then. My name's David Hales, and welcome to Analyzing Text. Your credibility depends on it. So I'm really glad that you chose to came today. And again, I want to make sure that everybody knows that this session is being recorded. And just to point out a couple things as we get started. And of course, the first, I'm sure if you've been to other Zoom meetings or recordings or webinars of some kind, you know that we're going to go over some of the obligatory pieces like the toolbar and what's down there, making sure that people are muted so that there isn't any interference. And then a couple pieces that we'll actually be utilizing from the toolbar today. Of course, the chat feature, and that will be coming up shortly. And then we're actually going to be accessing a raising your hand feature that you're going to find in participants. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But just the key thing is to make sure that you can identify where the toolbar is at the bottom of your screen or whenever you use your mouse, and it'll appear. So just to make sure everybody's kind of set on that. As far as the chat feature in particular, we're going to have everybody introduce themselves just so we get used to locating that. So if you could please put your first name and your position, your classroom teacher or coach or administrator or something else, and grade level or who you work with, and put that and send that as a chat to everybody. I'd appreciate it. We can see who's in the room. And while you do that, though, we are going to say that if you want to ask a question or send something particular to me, what we're going to have you do is we're going to have you send it through Rosalind Shahid, and she's my co-pilot. So she's going to be monitoring the chat for us. So send that to Rosalind. But go ahead and let's see who we have in the room.
Perfect. I see that we have a media specialist, Shannon, a K-5 media specialist. We have Trenton, literacy coach and interventionist. We have a pre-K working today with us, so that will be fantastic. We have a literacy coach, and we have a classroom teacher and a parapro.
Excellent.
Quite a few people here today.
Very nice. I'm thrilled, and I appreciate it. I think we'll have a good conversation. Let me tell you about some of the things that we're going to need or we're going to zero in on today. As far as material, it's helpful to have, maybe a notepad or scratch paper or a post-it note or just something that you could maybe jot down a couple of thoughts on. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but that'll kind of help with a couple of thought questions that we're going to have that I'm going to ask you to respond to. And then the work that we're going to do today is really going to focus around two websites in particular, although I did list three there. And so I want you to know that you're going to see those websites again, and we're going to do a deeper dive on those websites. But I just wanted to put those up front. They're going to appear in the chat as well, so you'll see them multiple times. But I just wanted to let you know that those are what we're going to be zeroing in on, okay? And so what are the outcomes for today? So we're really going to center our work around three things. One is, and one and three are especially tied together, right? We're going to really focus on kids analyzing text, a rich, wide variety of resources, right, for them to gain information. And we're going to talk about the analysis tools that they use to do that with. And we're going to focus on two sources, and those were the websites that we just saw. One is from the Library of Congress, and the other is from the National Archives. So we're going to practice it a little bit ourselves. We're going to zero in on what those tools have to offer. We're going to compare and contrast them and talk a little bit about, and that's really the second outcome, is talk about their use. How would you use it? Why would you use one relative to another? And really how important that is about having really rich discussion around really rich text, information that's really so essential for kids. And that's really what we're going to study. We're going to see those three outcomes later. We'll always, of course, be keeping those in mind and circling back to those. Okay, so just a little bit about myself real quick, and then jump right in. So I'm the social studies consultant at Wayne Risa, which means my work extends K-12. And I want to put a plug in. You don't have to be a social studies teacher by any means for us to stay connected. In the way that I stay connected to people, there are multiple ways, of course. But one way, for sure, is through the variety of listservs that I have. And you can see them, of course, on the screen, that they're everywhere from a K2 list to grade 3, grade 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then in high school, each high school course has a separate list. There are well over 4,000 teachers if you put together all of those lists. How are those used? They're used as a way for me to keep teachers informed and updated, not just for professional development, but also something that might be an update from the Michigan Department of Education. It could be resources that are available. But on the flip side of that, and this is where, again, you certainly do not have to be a social studies teacher by any means, is teachers will frequently, or educators will frequently contact me saying, you know, I really have a question about X or Y and what other teachers might be doing across the county. And with having that size of a pool of participants in this, I can oftentimes push it out through a respective listserv and get a pretty good reply back that I can then, reply to people in a particular category, that have an interest on a particular topic. And so that's proven to be very helpful. So consider that. My email is there. You're going to see that again plugged in at the very end. So something to think about. So the my why, and I borrowed this from Rosalind because I loved the my why. What you're seeing in front of you there are not stock photos. Those are real kids that happen to be, with permission, by the way, the use of the slides from Hamtramck. And they're doing exactly what we're going to talk about today, which is, this is not just some abstract exercise on how to analyze text. What you see in those pictures, if those pictures could only talk, is kids using analysis tools, really engaged in the world that's around them, meaning they're engaged using those analysis tools with information, with artifacts, with text in a variety of forms, with newspapers, with yearbooks, with school material, all sorts of things. In their local historical museum around local history. So they're engaged in their history and seeing their place in it to better understand their world, but also their future in their world. And that's exactly what ended up happening, is kids being better informed of their community, of why it is, the way certain things are and how they came to be, and how possibly things might look in the future and what role and responsibility they might have in that. And that's the kind of thing I'm sure all teachers, whether we're pre-K or no matter what our responsibilities are, that we thrive on, right? And I just absolutely love too, which is seeing kids engaged in the world around them, and that includes the rich source of material that kids have to be engaged in. So I'm going to sort of take us on a journey quickly through the social studies side, which is no surprise. I'm the social studies consultant. So I'm going to start with sort of the end in mind here for social studies. And this is where, of course, you're going to use the chat feature. And, Roz can help me out a little bit here. So social studies is one of the core disciplines, right? So tell me, just very quickly, by typing in the chat, why do kids need social studies? What's our target? What's our end goal for social studies? So type a couple things real quick in the chat and we'll have that reported out. All right, Roz, do we have some things?
Yes, thank you, Dave. Jolyn writes, to know our past, present, history, and possibly predict the future.
Oh, interesting. Absolutely.
Yes, Valerie writes, learning about the world, different communities and history. Kids need to understand our past in order to become global citizens. That's from Don. Doreen writes, kids need to know our history and what is expected of our citizens of our country. The target is to raise responsible citizens to pay. And finally, knowledge of culture in the world around them.
Everything that I heard in there absolutely fits together, and I heard some key words, and you're going to see it in here. It's really, if you could sort of succinctly define it, and you'll hear me phrase it even different ways. It really revolves around that responsible citizenship, which people really often refer to as being an informed and an engaged citizen. That's really our end goal, right? Being informed and engaged. So stay with me because we're going to kind of go on a journey here. So what does that look like, right? How do you get to that end? And I apologize for the little fuzzy graphic. Sometimes I think that that's not a inaccurate representation of citizenship. Sometimes a little fuzzy, but responsible citizenship is what we're aiming for. Obviously, you can see where content fits in this, right? You have to have content knowledge. It's a foundational piece. That's the disciplinary knowledge. But we all know as responsible citizens that it's more than that. You have to have thinking skills. You have to apply those thinking skills of analysis, right? You have to have the democratic values. You have to be able to question, have that desire to question the world that's around you, and the citizenship participation, which means you're engaged in the world that's around you. All four of those elements have to fit together for us to really end up with someone who's a responsible citizen. It's not just a matter of knowing content. You have to have the dispositions, and that comes through practicing it and thinking about it and mulling it over. Citizenship can be a messy thing, and it takes practice, and it's a lifelong pursuit, okay, without a doubt. So what I want to ask you then, and this is the first time we're going to use the raising a hand feature, okay, which I'm going to tell you, again, if you think about the control bar, is if you click on participants, it's in there either by itself or it's where there are three dots listed. So if you click on participant, it's either by itself as a hand or there's three dots. And this is what I want you to think about. So if we all agree that the bottom line is that we want active, informed, engaged citizens, right? So I don't care if this is pre-K, if you've got an upper L, a middle schooler, or a high schooler, if that's what we're aiming for, so what does classroom instruction need to look like if that's what we want for our kids? What's the instruction need to look like? What do kids need to be doing in a classroom if that's what we want to end up with?
So Valerie has her hand raised.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad people are finding some success with finding the hand. Okay,
Okay,
so
Valerie, you can go
Valerie?
ahead and,
Yeah. Hey, Valerie.
Hi. Okay, I guess my answer would be that the classroom would have to look like a community, that everyone is sharing ideas, everyone's ideas matter, and that uh, kids are learning that their opinions count.
Nice. Very nice. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other hands at all?
Yes, we have Jolyn.
Oh, Jolyn
I hope I'm pronouncing
or
your name
Joylyn,
correctly.
maybe?
Joylyn? Yes, Joylyn. Joylyn, you can unmute yourself and
Yeah.
go ahead and speak.
Yeah, students would have to be more connected with each other in order to get the feel of community and citizenship. Because in an online classroom, it's not going to be easy
Wow.
because you don't get to see each other that much. But when you're in a closed room, you get to be with each other, talk to each other, and you develop a better relationship. So to be
I
a
agree.
responsible citizen, you need to get together often too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree very much. Is there anyone else, Rosalind, or were those the two?
Okay, we have one more hand.
Yeah, let's do one more.
Hello.
Warafa.
Yeah. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this session. I just wanted to come on here and say my opinion. I feel that if we want this type of classroom instruction, I feel that students need to know the difference between facts and opinions.
Mhm.
And what does an informed opinion look like? We need to understand that there are always multiple perspectives whenever we're dealing with anything, and that I think inquiry is important. They need to be able to ask the right questions, and they need to be asked the right questions, and have them go out there and get those answers, and then have maybe like a debate with each other to see, the different information that each person got.
Absolutely. Those are great comments. And I think you'll see where you don't, it doesn't have to be specifically grounded in social studies. This is applicable across all disciplines. And I'll show you what I mean. That, in the case of social studies, this is grounded in something we call the C3 framework, the college, career, and civic life. But it's, what I'm going to describe is certainly applicable across any discipline. And so, just to follow up on what was just said about really being informed, seeing multiple perspectives, really to connect all of the things that was previously mentioned, it's saying that in social studies that for responsible citizenship, that the kind of instruction that we really need to see really combines the elements that I was talking about previously. That's really four things. One, and again, there's no pecking order to these, that all four of these work together. They don't stand in isolation. One is that good social studies, good citizenship is really inquiry. It's based on questions, that we value questioning the world that's around us, right? That's a natural part, right? A human instinct, but it's something that we particularly value as citizens, questioning what's going on really around us, questioning the world. Second is that we actually are applying content knowledge. That's where like our standards, for example, fit in. That's really that second dimension that's there in the chart. But the disciplinary tools also include things like thinking like a historian, right? So there are other pieces to that, the disciplinary tools, specific to those disciplines, as well as concepts and content. So it's asking questions, it's content. But you notice it's also evaluating sources and using evidence. That you can not only gather and evaluate sources, but you're developing claims, you're using evidence. That if you're a responsible or an engaged citizen, then you're stating how you feel. You're giving an opinion, but you're being able to substantiate that to provide evidence, right? And if you're going to provide evidence, you have to know, again, as was just stated, is that fact or is it fiction? And how do you know that? What's of value? What's relevant? What's not relevant, right? Because we live in such an information dense world. How do you sort all that out as a citizen? That's part of social studies. That's part of being actively engaged. And then you're communicating, right? We're social studies, so it's social. That means communicating, whether it's just a thought partner, next to you, an elbow partner, or whether it's your classroom community or your community at large. But you're engaged. right? That's the taking informed action. You become part of your community by being engaged in your community, right? This is not a passive endeavor when it comes to being a responsible citizen. And that means you are deep in the information, right? That you're having to analyze and look at, talk about, think about, speak about, okay? That's sort of the foundation piece for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn that into, okay, the focus of today is looking at it really, it's just a content-rich environment. How do you analyze all of this and sort of make sense of it? So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on really two tools, okay? Two sources of tools from the National Archives and from the Library of Congress. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to jump right into an activity, and then I'm going to show you the tools. And then I mentioned earlier, we're going to kind of compare and contrast them and have you kind of make some decisions on, you know, what you sort of think of them and how you choose to use them, etc. Okay, so let's jump right into it here. Hopefully this doesn't appear too fuzzy to you on here, but just as an example, this is the image we're going to work with, okay, collectively. And we're small enough, I think, that what we're going to try as we move on to the next slides is I'm going to try to have you just unmute and answer. And if that becomes unworkable, then, you know, we'll go to having people go to chat or raising hands. But we're going to try it first by seeing if we can, you know, having people unmute. So there's the image we're going to look at. You're going to be looking at it for the next couple slides. Okay.
Dave,
so yeah.
Just one point, I apologize. We discovered that they're not able to unmute on their own. So if we continue to use the raise hand feature.
Oh, okay.
For us and decide
Excellent.
to speak. Perfect.
Thank you. That would have been frustrating. Thanks for letting me know. So we're going to jump into the Library of Congress first, okay? So this is how they have them analyze the sources of information. Now, I'll be honest with you, I chose a picture because given our time frame, this was, it was in a sense easier and faster to do. And so that's just the way I chose to do it. But we'll look at the analysis tools for a variety of sources, okay? So here's the way they do it. They first have you observe, and then I'm going to take you through the steps. But the first is observation. And they provide you with these guides to structure this for the kids. So I want to have you actually go ahead and do this by raising your hand. I'm not going to give you any hints or clues on this, but just based on what you see, and hopefully it's clear enough on here, pick any one of these. Describe what you see. What do you notice first when you observe this? What people and objects are shown? How are they arranged? What's the physical setting? What do you observe when you see this? Can you raise your hand? Pick any one of those. What do you observe when you see that?
Go ahead, Joylyn.
Yeah, I see a bunch of children playing in an open playground, and it looks like late 1800s, and they all seem to be like, you know, out of a school program or something like that.
Interesting. See, now notice as an adult and your level of knowledge and expertise, you've already jumped to later steps, right, that students would not have. You can bring more to bear, right, based on your life experiences and knowledge, by thinking of the time frame, by thinking on what the motive might be. How about, was there someone else with the two hands over raised? Oh, Valerie?
That's Valerie. Would you like to go ahead and share, Valerie? Thank you.
Hi, it looks like they're on a seesaw, and it just looks, I don't know, it looks unbalanced maybe, like there's, oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Some people are weighing it down.
Yeah, you can kind of see which side the adults seem to be on, right? Although not exclusively, but. So it does observe first, okay? That's the first category, the Library of Congress. And then it goes to the next category, which is reflect. So it has the kids first observe, then reflect. So notice the question difference. Why do you think this image was made? So it's asking the kids to sort of reflect on this. What's happening in the image? When do you think it was made? Who do you think was the audience for this image? What tools were used to create this? What can you learn from examining this image? And if somebody made this today, would it be different? And what would be the same? There's a lot of great sentence starters for journal entries, to me, but just as purely as reflection though, anybody want to raise their hand and pick any one of those?
Well, if this were made today, the clothing would be different. The playground equipment would be different. And then as far as very current events go, we wouldn't be
Oh, true.
as close together unmasked.
Yeah, it's not a
the
COVID-19
distancing.
friendly environment, is it? That's a good point.
Okay. Valerie, I think she wants to, oh, I lost her.
Okay, I think nowadays, it would be maybe a little bit, the level would be a little bit different between adults and kids. Adults listen to children a little bit more and than they did when I was little. It's not a matter of respect, but people value what children have to say. And so I kind of think that it might be a little bit more level.
Interesting. Jalen?
Go ahead, Joylyn.
Yeah, I think this was made using a static black and white camera. And if it was made today, it would be made using a video camera. And you would get a broader picture of the entire playground. Whereas in this picture, you can just see that one narrow focus. So you cannot see the wider picture, and it would be a lot different and more informative.
True. So Library of Congress, their tool is observe, reflect, and then the last part, the third question, it is the questioning, which to me, it reminds me a lot of the visual thinking strategy of see, think, wonder, right? Which is just the questions of what you kind of wonder about when you look at this. The who, what, when, where, why, a question that just sort of, as you're wondering, that doesn't necessarily fit a particular category. Is there a question that you sort of, anyone particularly has about it when they take a look at this picture?
I'm wondering a little bit, Dave, about the context of the picture. Why was it taken? Where are they exactly? The year.
Yeah,
We have some indication based on their clothing, but
that's true.
They look very formal. So I'm just wondering about that.
Well, I'm going to show you the fourth part, and then I'm going to spill the beans on the background for the picture, okay? But there's actually a fourth part for the analysis, which is sort of an extension. They have some follow-up activities in particular. The Library of Congress provides, which include like having the students maybe write a caption for the image, or an intermediate level, I love this one, frankly, predict what will happen 1 minute after the scene shown in the image, or 1 hour after, and explain your reasoning why on here. Are the kids going to go flying up in the air here? Or advanced, have them expand or alter textbook or other printed explanations of history based on the images that they study. The point is, I think, is that they offer you some suggestions of how the kids might interact with this. So the Library of Congress provides an interesting tool. They're very popular, and we're going to dig into them in just a second here. I wanted to use a picture that was actually fairly close to home. So believe it or not, that picture that you're looking at is from Belle Isle. And the exact date is not known, but what is known with certainty is it's between 1900 and 1905. But they're not exactly sure which date. But it's been positively identified between 1900 and 1905, and it's in the Library of Congress. And it's at a park, it says, but on Belle Isle. So I thought it was interesting to show kids, somewhere close to home. So let's take a look at the Library of Congress. That's one of the two sources. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing for a brief moment and open up another source, which is the Library of Congress source. So bear with me just for a quick second. Okay, now I'm going to, and so Roz, do you see the Library of Congress? Individual teacher page?
Yes, we can see your screen. And I also put in the link if folks want to go ahead and star that for
Okay.
those to go
So
back to.
here's the first thing I want to mention to you. If you have never gone to the Library of Congress, or in particular, if you've the teacher page, if you've ever heard the expression of trying to drink out of a fire hose, this is a good example, and we're not going to have that happen today. Okay, I'm going to tell you that right now. Meaning that there is so much here that's available as a resource. You see immediately when you look in the middle, you can search materials here, lesson plans and sources by Common Core, by your own state standards, or by organization. So if you wanted to go, for example, the National Council for Teaching English and look for lessons that automatically align to standards, it'll do that. There's a lot here. We're only focusing on one thing, which is in the middle, which is using the primary sources, the primary source tools. This, I tell you, is the mother lode for analyzing sources of information. So you're going to see that if I scroll down, each one of these is an analysis tool for that particular source of information. So, of course, not just printed text, there's objects, motion picture, political cartoons, songs, recordings, oral history, manuscripts. But I picked pictures or photographs down here, or prints. And this will look familiar to you when you look at the questions, right? Describe what you see. What did you notice first? What people and objects are shown? This is the template that they have set up. And they use the same template for every type of resource. Okay, observe, reflect, question, and then for further investigation, they give you options down at the bottom. And they will vary slightly, depending, of course, on what the resource is. So I'm going to go to analyzing books and other printed texts. And scroll down just for a minute. Again, there's observe, reflect, and question. And so what I want to have you do just for a second is skim this, all the categories. And one thing I want to point out on this is that there is no pecking order to it, meaning it's really up to you and how you choose to use this based on what your goals are. In other words, kids can go between observe, reflect, or question, back and forth, or you can stay anchored in one particular. It's really up to you and what your goals are. Okay, so I should have said that earlier, and I'll come back to that. What I want to have you do, though, is look at that, skim it for me, look at those questions. What do you notice that's, because there's a lot of things that are the same, what do you notice that's maybe different or particular to this versus the one that we did for photographs, for example? Can you raise your hand? What's something you noticed that's different in this, that's particular to this source? And then raise your hand when you found something.
I think it's more structured, and it's following systematic procedure.
Okay. Can you give me, can somebody give me, or Joylan, give me an example of something that it has you look at that you saw?
Arlen, you have the floor.
Yeah.
I think what is the larger story or context within which this was printed was different.
Mm. Yeah. So what's interesting about using Library of Congress tools then is it's a very consistent format, right? The observe, reflect, question, and many of those questions are exactly the same with some subtle differences from each one. You have the ability, let me go up to the top here for a second. You have the ability to have a blank one if you want to create your own. So this is listed, this is an option as well, okay? These are very popular and can be used lots of different ways. We'll talk about in a little bit, how you might want to, how you might think of using them. I think it's helpful when you contrast it to some of the other sources of the analysis tools that are available. But these are used really quite heavily from the Library of Congress, okay? So I want to contrast it to another source, right, based on the time. So I said I was going to show two. The second is from the National Archives, little different approach. So here's the first thing I want you to do is I want you to take a look. Let me slide this out of the way here a little bit. Up towards the top. If you take a look at the two, what do you notice automatically that's different on what's listed? What's automatically different? What are the options that it gives you that's different? Because the sources are pretty much the same, right? Jalen?
One is for younger students and one is for secondary students.
Yeah, the National Archives chosen to separate them, right, between the two. So let's open up photograph, because we just did photograph, right? So this is analyzing a photograph. Meet the photo, observe its parts, try to make sense of it. And obviously this is the one for the younger. So what's same, what's different? Valerie.
Well, I think it's very directive. They are very specific in what they want you to answer. They're not giving you a lot of choice. They want the caption to be 2 words. Just in my classroom, it would be too directive for me. That's just what I notice.
Excellent. No, that's a good point. That's why part of the reason why I really wanted to show you the two is to kind of compare and contrast them, because depending on your need, depending on the kids, depending on lots of variables, one, may get you closer to your goal than another. Let's take a look at one of the high school ones, okay? Just to give you some idea. This is also for photograph. Observe its parts, people, objects, activities. Try to make sense of it. Same thing. What are some same features? What are some different features maybe from the Library of Congress? Anybody with a quick hand? Same, different.
I think it provides a little bit more scaffolding for students to analyze. It gives them some ways to kind of think about it. And, depending upon the style that you have or your approach, you can use this as a first step and then, to explore.
Right. That's the first. I was just going to, one of the things I was going to have people do is I was going to have people turn to the chat, and I'm just going to have you a very quick poll or reply is to either type in LOC or NA, which is but knowing your kids, right, from past experience and all the other variables that go into this. Just based on what little you've seen, assuming that you've not previously used any of these, are you more inclined with the LOC, the Library of Congress, or National Archives tools? Would you type in for me either LOC or NA just based on what you've seen so far?
We have quite a few for the LOC. LLC, quite a few for the LLC, and a couple for the National Archive.
So can a few people raise their hand and tell me why did they pick those? Why one over the other? I mean, talked a little bit about it already, but for you in particular, why one relative to the other? Doreen?
Well, I teach second grade, and I like the support. It does have more scaffolding for younger students to help them organize their thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Definitely. Definitely. It provides that. You bet. You bet. Someone else? Why one versus the other? Well, some of the reasons people really have brought up, if you're looking for that, and Doreen just did, if you're talking about that structure, National Archives, I think, is going to provide that. And if that's something that's needed almost as a scaffold, that's fine. I mean, it's not like you can't use both, depending on what your goal is and depending on the student audience. Both are certainly possible. Something that I wanted to identify, because both of these sites, whether it's Library of Congress or National Archives, are just, remember I mentioned drinking out of a fire hose. They're abundant with resources, but something specific to working with primary sources is National Archives has what's called Docs Teach, which is really a website within the website. And it's specifically focused on teaching kids how to use primary sources. And they divide the site between exploring, discovering, and creating. So, this contains everything from primary source collections to all the lessons, which you can search. Now, these are organized by social studies topics, okay, and themes. So I just want to say that straight out. But one of the features for our purposes I wanted to highlight is under the Create, which says fun and engaging activities. Because this to me is very much applicable sort of across disciplines. I thought this is just brilliant to me, is, analyzing documents, right? Absolutely great. That's what we're doing. But then check it out. It's focusing on details, discussion topic, right? Focusing on details, spotlighting, focusing on details, zoom and crop. So what are you looking at here? You're actually looking at a template of how to create your own lesson on this. In other words, they provide you with a lesson plan, a template for one, that basically you can sort of insert as a plug and play the primary sources. Where do you get the primary sources? From the National Archives. In other words, they've set it up for you, because there's nothing worse, right, than having to try to figure out from square one, how do I get the source? Where do I get the source? How do I do this? Like, what's a protocol for finding a sequence? What's the best way to really do compare and contrast with a primary source? They actually give you the protocol in here that you use with the kids. They would lay it out for you. And if you get a chance to scroll down through it, making connections, mapping history, seeing the big picture, how to weigh evidence in here. I love this. I thought this was just brilliant. I mean, you still piece it together because it's going to be based on the content that you want. But the thinking skills that go along with this, they're providing that information for you. And that's all under Docs Teach. which is from the National Archives. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. Again, I've scratched the surface of what's available, but our focus is really on really sources, rich source material for us to be able to look at, for kids to be able to look at. And I wanted to mention something here as well. I keep saying 2 sources, and there really are those 2 sources, but I listed 3 websites that are on here. And so I just want to bring up the third. Consider it sort of a bonus, I guess, for lack of another phrase. It's a website called Emerging America. And what's unique about this website is because if you haven't thought of this already, trust me, you will, which is the persistent challenge that if you're working with primary sources, it's the issue of accessibility, right? With all students, text that appears archaic, is different to kids. Sometimes it's the matter of font. Sometimes it's a matter of style. It just lots of things. Custom, you name it. There's just all sorts of things in play here that make it difficult for kids to interpret. And if you are experienced either in special needs or EL, if you're an English language learner of some kind, then there are even more challenges, right, with that. And so what's different about this site that I like is really their focus is on trying to make primary sources accessible to all kids. And their emphasis in particular is on EL students and special needs students. And so what's different? They don't give you different tools. They actually utilize the Library of Congress and the National Archives tools, okay? But what they do is they do offer some resources that are specific, like, let me see if I can move this over here. Accessing inquiry for English language learners through primary sources. They have protocols in here for how you might do this with EL students. There's actually some content in here about teaching, historically about disabilities, etc. That's a separate thing. But under teacher resources and on accessing inquiry, under engaging strategies, inquiry strategies, they've done a nice job of compiling multiple sources and different protocols to be utilized to really try to make these accessible to all kids. So to me, it was sort of a nice umbrella site that brings sort of everything together on here. So it's a little bit of everything, to be honest with you. I mean, I guess that's maybe the best way to explain that.
I think that's just such a beautiful site, the Emerging America site. It really highlights the need for all children to have access to these primary sources. And as you mentioned already, teachers really sometimes struggle with how to do that successfully. So, so happy to learn that an organization has done some of that work for us.
Yeah, it's funded by it's one of many, many projects funded by the Library of Congress. And so, it does contain curriculum by itself on disabilities, history. So there's that aspect, but then there's also the pedagogy side for teachers in a classroom. So it offers a lot of things. And it's relatively new. At least, well, I'm not exactly sure, but it's a nice source to look at. So I threw that in as sort of a bonus because that's a real issue, right? That's a real issue that people face. And that's the National Archives page. That's the Emerging America page. I think one of the things that I wanted to, and I think we've had such a nice conversation with people. We don't necessarily have to do the waterfall piece. It because I really have enjoyed the conversation. So it's nice to hear individual voices. But one of the questions was, it's our second outcome, which is why is it important? I think no, I'm using my own words here, so I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate. Why is it important to carefully select texts that encourage rich discussion? In other words, why is it important to really include all these multi-texts? I mean, how does this fit into the bigger picture for us? I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate. It's a lot of work. It's difficult for kids to understand sometimes some of these sources. But why does it matter? Why is it important? So it's okay to me to have you raise a hand and then just to unmute. That might be a better way to do that. Why? Why is it important?
Lorraine?
I think that if we're encouraging responsible citizenship and for students to, and future adults to participate in our society, that being able to have a rich discussion with people who have differing viewpoints will be something that's very valuable, and something that we're seeing right now in our country is a stumbling block right now.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I love that. We live in a information-rich environment, and which is worthy of a rich discussion, frankly, right? Given the amount of information that's available. But you need to know how to be able to access it, how to process that, right? And that takes learning, that takes practice, that takes thinking, that takes teaching, right? So yeah, I like the way you phrased that. Other things, why is this so important?
I think it would be better for everybody, and to create a better future for everybody, and to make people more empathetic towards other people.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
One of the things to me I've noticed as an effect, and I've heard from teachers too, Valerie, just real quick, is that kids will start to notice as they use the tools more, they start to recognize those sources as sources of information, but they don't always recognize moving picture, or, I mean, some like text, that more traditional, right, print-based, they obviously do. But they don't always as photograph or moving picture or audio, they don't always realize as a source of information. And they start to recognize that more, the more they use that. It's like the world opens up to them.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks, Valerie.
I think what Lorraine said, and the gentleman just after her too, just in hearing the different views, and what you just said too about the print, it's right there. You can keep looking at it, looking for more detail. Kids love that. They love to like examine things and say why they think that's in the picture. And you can get everybody's opinion, so people view things differently.
Mm-hmm. And what's nice, just as a plug for Library of Congress and National Archives, is they are superior when it comes to providing resource sets that they go by different names depending on which institution, but we're pre-gathered based on topics. They've gathered sources of information for you to utilize, so that, based on suggestions from teachers, in order to try to really help gather, things in advance for people. So yeah, it's pretty amazing, Okay, so let's kind of circle back to our outcomes, okay? So three outcomes. First was really focused on the two sources for analysis tools, which is really Library of Congress and National Archives. It doesn't mean that there aren't other sources, but to me, those are the two biggies really that are out there. Not to say you can't find others, but those are probably the most widely used, or something is a derivation from one or the other. Um, the third sort of outcome, I guess, for us, I'm going to skip two for a minute because I think 1 and 3 really go hand in hand, which is one way to really empower kids to analyze text, to look at authors' biases, their overall purpose. Remember, one of the questions was, who wrote this and why? Right? Who's the audience for this? That's as relevant looking at a picture of the kids, you know, on a good old-fashioned seesaw or teeter-totter or whatever those they used to be called back from when I was a kid a long, long time ago, to nowadays, right? Who wrote it? Why did they write it? Who's it intended for? That's empowering for kids, but they have to know how to look at it, right? And how to think about it, and they need an opportunity to talk about it and to share that, right? That's crucial. And then the second piece, again, and obviously these are all interrelated, they're all connected, is that means a wide variety of sources. So strictly print-based, you know, of course, is and will always be a source of information, whether that's a newspaper, whether that's something out of a text, of course. The students in Hamtramck were looking at old school newspapers, which was fascinating for them, and yearbooks and all sorts of print. But they also looked at photographs and sheet music, objects. They looked, you know, they could read objects, which really surprised them. They were not used to thinking of an object as a source of information, of which there was a protocol for learning how to read it. So it was very interesting. So I think those really were our 3 outcomes for today. And then I'd like to again put in a plug. There's my email there, is that if you're interested for information about either social studies resources, PD that's coming up, or if you have a question that pertains to primary sources, you know, what's either out there or particular related to a topic, a good way is to join one of these social studies listservs. And then that way I can not only stay in touch with you to continue to support you, but it's a way for us to stay connected and for you to reach back out to me again and know that we're, you know, connected across probably 4,200 teachers or so. And that's what I have for today. I'm thrilled to share this with you and have appreciated the conversation.